Apache chief thought the cowgirl just wanted help for the night, but not like this. When she appeared at his fire after sundown, her voice trembled with gratitude, yet her eyes carried a secret heavier than the desert sky. She asked for shelter, but brought danger instead, something unseen riding close behind her. By morning, one would owe the other a life, but who came seeking help? And who came seeking redemption? Wind swept through the canyon, carrying dust and the faint scent of rain. The Apache chief stood at the edge of the firelight, cloak stirring against his boots, watching the lone rider approach. The horse moved unevenly, one hoof dragging as though it, too, had come too far. When she stopped before the fire, the cowgirl barely lifted her gaze. Her hat shadowed her face, but the tremor in her shoulders spoke louder than words. He didn't ask her name. Out here, names meant little. Deeds told the story. Still, he saw the dried blood along her sleeve, the bruises at her knuckles, the rope marks on her wrists. She had fled something that could still be following. The camp was silent but for the crackle of mesquite wood. Around them the desert exhaled, long, slow, unforgiving. The chief's people had broken camp hours earlier, leaving only the embers and the trail of hoofprints that would vanish by morning. He'd stayed behind to watch the storm build, to listen for omens in the thunder. Instead, he found her. The cowgirl dismounted without a word. Her boots sank into the sand, heavy from the miles behind her. She unstrapped the rifle and held it out, but not toward him. She let it drop to the ground, a dull thud that scattered dust. A gesture of surrender or guilt. The chief's eyes narrowed. He'd seen weapons fall that way before, when a person carried too much sin to hold on to steel. She finally spoke, voice hoarse. "I just need shelter. One night." The wind stole half her words, but the desperation stayed. He motioned toward the fire. She hesitated, then stepped closer, her outline flickering in the amber glow. Lightning forked across the horizon, white against the bruised sky. For a heartbeat, her face was clear, and the chief saw what she was hiding. Fear, yes, but something else. Resolve, maybe even vengeance. Thunder rolled, slow and distant. The night had only begun, and with it, a story that neither of them could walk away from. The storm hit before midnight. Wind roared down the canyon, whipping sparks from the fire into the dark like burning insects. The cowgirl huddled beneath her worn coat, trembling, not from coldness, but from the kind of exhaustion that digs deep into the bones. Across the flames, the Apache chief crouched silent, sharpening the edge of a blade against a smooth stone. Each scrape echoed like thunder rolling between cliffs. He hadn't asked her any questions. Not yet. She watched him through the flicker of light, uneasy. His stillness was not the stillness of peace. It was the quiet of a man measuring something unseen. She swallowed hard and tried again to speak. "I can pay," she said, voice barely carrying over the wind. "I don't want trouble." The chief lifted his gaze, slow as the desert sunrise. "If you wanted no trouble," he said, "you would not have brought it here." Her jaw tightened. She looked down at her hands, the faint tremor returning. The rope burns on her wrists were raw and fresh. He noticed, of course he did, but said nothing. The fire popped. A log collapsed into glowing embers. Lightning cracked across the sky. For an instant, the world turned white. The chief saw the truth written in her stance, the way her knees bent slightly, as though ready to run. He recognized the reflex, prey, expecting pursuit. "Who hunts you?" he asked. Her eyes flicked toward the horizon, where shadows moved against the pale ridge. "Men who think they own everything they see," she whispered. "Land, cattle, women." The last word hung in the air like smoke. The chief's blade stilled. He set it aside, then reached for a clay bowl resting near the fire. Steam rose from the herbs steeping inside. He poured some into a small cup and extended it toward her. "Drink," he said. "The desert takes strength fast." She hesitated but took it. The warmth spread through her hands as she sipped. The bitterness bit at her tongue. He watched her carefully, as if the way she drank told him more than her words ever could. Outside, thunder rolled closer. The horses stamped nervously under a mesquite tree. The air smelled of rain and dust and something electric, like waiting violence. Finally, she asked, "Why help me?" He didn't answer at first. He studied the horizon again, the line where darkness met distant firelight. "Because you did not ask for pity," he said, "only for time." A gust of wind blew through the camp, scattering ash across the ground. She followed his gaze, saw what he saw, tiny flashes far off, too steady to be lightning, lanterns, riders moving fast. Her heart lurched. "They found me." The chief rose in one smooth motion. "Then you must choose," he said quietly. "Hide or face what follows." "I can't run again," she said. "Not tonight." He studied her for a moment longer. There was no fear in her tone now, only a heavy resolve that told him she had crossed the point of return long before this night. He reached for his bow. "Then stay near the fire," he said, "and do not speak." The cowgirl crouched low, gripping the rifle she had dropped earlier. The weapon felt foreign in her hands, cold and too heavy for her frame. The chief moved like a shadow, taking position behind a ridge of stone that overlooked the trail. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then sharp, slicing through the heat. Each drop hissed against the coals. Through the downpour came the distant sound of voices, rough and slurred with drink. "She can't have gone far. Check the ridge, there's smoke." The chief's eyes narrowed. His hand brushed the feathers tied to his bowstring, a silent invocation to ancestors long buried in this ground. He waited until the riders came close enough that he could see the shapes of their coats glistening in the rain. The cowgirl's breath caught. She wanted to look, but the chief raised one hand, stilling her. The wind shifted, carrying their scent away from the trail. The riders hesitated, uncertain, then turned back toward the canyon mouth, cursing the storm. Minutes passed. The sound of hooves faded. Only then did the chief lower his hand. "They will return," he said. "Men who take do not stop because the rain tells them to." She nodded, eyes shining in the firelight. "Then I'll be ready." He studied her again, the mud on her skirt, the blood dried into her sleeve, the stubborn glint that refused to break. He recognized that kind of strength. It was born of loss and hardened by necessity. "Rest," he said at last. "You will need it before dawn." As he turned back toward the fire, thunder cracked once more, rolling through the canyon like a warning. The storm had passed overhead, but something darker was still coming, something the fire could not keep away. And far off in the desert night, a single lantern flickered back to life. The pursuers had found the trail again. The lantern light in the distance wavered, then steadied again. The cowgirl stiffened, her breath clouding in the cool air. The chief's eyes didn't leave the horizon. He had seen it too. "They found the trail," she whispered. He gave a slow nod. "They never lost it." The fire was dying now, just embers and smoke. The chief moved quickly, scattering the remains with a branch until the glow vanished beneath a thin veil of dust. Darkness closed around them like a cloak. The storm had passed, leaving the world raw and glistening. Every drop of rain seemed to carry sound for miles. "Come," he said, motioning toward a line of jagged rocks that split the canyon wall. "We move." The cowgirl followed, boots sinking in wet sand. Her steps were uncertain, but she didn't complain. The rifle hung at her side, heavy and quiet. She looked smaller now beneath the moonlight, less like a fugitive, more like someone running from the weight of her own choices. They climbed until they reached a narrow shelf overlooking the desert floor. The chief crouched and pointed. Below, 3 riders were dismounting near the remnants of their campfire, their torches casting trembling halos of light. 3, she murmured. There were 5 before. 2 may have gone around, he said. To close the path. She clenched her jaw. Then we're trapped. Only if you wait to be. He turned, studying her face. The streak of dirt on her cheek couldn't hide the fear there, but behind it was something sharper. Determination. Whatever she was hiding, it wasn't weakness. He handed her a small pouch. Powder. Throw it in the fire when they get close. She took it. What happens then? Smoke, he said. Enough to blind men who see only one way forward. Below, the riders spread out, torches cutting through the dark. One of them called out, a coarse, taunting voice. We just want to talk. Ain't no use running from friends. The cowgirl's knuckles tightened around the pouch. Friends, she muttered. That's one word for them. The chief raised a hand for silence. He could hear more than she could. The jangle of spurs, the creak of leather, the impatient snort of a horse. He whispered low, "Stay still." Minutes dragged like hours. The riders approached the dead fire, circling it. One bent low, touching the sand where their footprints ended. He stood again, pointing toward the rocks. "Up there!" The chief moved first. He loosed an arrow that split the dark with a whisper, striking the torch from the man's hand. Sparks hissed as it hit the mud. Shouts erupted, followed by gunfire. Bullets sparked against the stone, sharp and metallic. The cowgirl ducked, heart hammering. "Now!" he barked. She flung the pouch into the fire remnants below. The powder ignited in a burst of white smoke that rolled through the camp like a ghost. The riders cursed, choking, stumbling backward into the haze. The chief pulled her by the arm, guiding her deeper into the ravine. They ran until the echoes faded. The rain had stopped, but the ground still clung to their boots, sucking with each step. When they finally stopped, both were breathing hard. The chief listened, tilting his head. The night was still again, save for the low moan of wind through stone. "You fight well," he said, "for someone who claims to want peace. I fight because they left me no choice." "What did you take from them?" Her silence was long. Then, "Nothing that was theirs to keep." He waited. She didn't elaborate. Instead, she turned away, wiping mud from her hands. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke again. "They burned a ranch that wasn't theirs, took what they wanted. I took something back." "What?" Her gaze found his. "Proof." Lightning flashed again, faint and distant. For a heartbeat, her eyes glimmered with something that wasn't fear, defiance, maybe even justice. She reached inside her coat and pulled out a folded envelope, its edges stained dark. The chief recognized the seal pressed into the wax. A rancher's mark, one belonging to a family with influence far beyond this desert. "Land papers," she said. "Deeds. They've been stealing homesteads for years, driving out anyone who couldn't fight back. I was supposed to deliver these to the sheriff before they caught me. And you thought they would let you ride free after that. They didn't plan to let me live at all." The chief looked down at the envelope, then toward the canyon's mouth. "Then they will not stop until it is taken back. I know." Her voice broke slightly. "But I couldn't just watch them keep it." The chief's eyes softened. "You are not the first to fight men with more power than mercy." The desert wind rose again, whispering through the rocks like an omen. Far below, the flicker of lanterns began to move once more, closer, steadier, relentless. He picked up his bow and looked toward her. "They come again," he said. She lifted her rifle. "Then we make our stand." The chief nodded once, silent approval passing between them. The riders' shouts echoed faintly through the canyon, carried by the wind. Somewhere in that sound was the promise of blood, and the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. Dawn bled slowly across the canyon, painting the rocks in muted gold. Mist clung to the low ground where the rain had settled overnight, softening the edges of the world. The Apache chief crouched near a shallow ridge, scanning the horizon through the pale light. Beside him, the cowgirl checked the rifle's chamber with careful, practiced hands. Her face was drawn, the shadows beneath her eyes darker now. Neither had slept. The air carried the faint echo of movement, metal, hooves, the impatient snort of horses. The riders were close again. "They'll come with the sun at their backs," the chief said. "They always do. Makes them feel stronger." She gave a humorless half-smile. "Then they've never seen what dawn does to a man who's hunted all night." He looked at her, studying the way she held the rifle. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear had hardened into something steadier, sharper. Determination mixed with weariness, the kind that doesn't break easily. Below them, the canyon floor opened wide and empty. The chief pointed to a line of stones that cut across a dry riverbed. "There," he said. "If they cross it, we can trap them for a moment." She nodded, crouching low. "How many?" "3, maybe 4. The rest turned back to fetch more men." She exhaled slowly, then whispered, "Good. Let them come." For a moment, silence filled the space between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. The chief reached into the dirt and drew a line with his finger. "When the wind changes, we move. Until then, we wait." They waited. The wind shifted minutes later, carrying the smell of sweat and leather. The cowgirl caught it too. Her pulse quickened. A flicker of light flashed among the rocks below, sunlight catching metal. The first rider appeared, a silhouette framed by the rising sun. Then another, then two more. They moved cautiously now, rifles ready. One dismounted, crouching to study hoofprints near the creek bed. "Tracks," the man called out. "Fresh," the chief whispered. "Now." She nodded. They rose together, shadows moving against the stone. The cowgirl fired first, one clean shot that echoed through the canyon like a whip crack. The rider dropped where he stood. The horses reared, screaming. The others scattered, shouting orders drowned by the echo of gunfire. The chief loosed an arrow, then another. One found its mark, striking a rider through the shoulder. The man's cry cut short as he tumbled from his horse. The remaining two fired wildly, bullets biting into the rocks. Stone chips sprayed across their faces. The cowgirl ducked behind cover, reloading. "They're pulling back," she said. "Only to circle," he replied. She glanced toward him. "Then we finish this before they find the higher ground." He met her eyes, steady, deliberate. "You speak like someone used to command." "Once," she said quietly. "Before they took everything that made that worth something." They moved again. The chief signaled with a hand, slipping down a narrow ledge while she flanked along the ridge. The wind howled between the cliffs, carrying dust that shimmered like smoke. One of the riders had climbed higher, lining his shot along a rock. The chief saw the glint of the barrel just before it fired. He dropped flat, the bullet slicing the air above him. The cowgirl reacted instantly, swinging her rifle, firing once, twice. The man fell backward, his rifle clattering down the slope. When the echoes faded, only the wind remained. The canyon was still again, except for the sound of hooves retreating fast toward the open desert. She lowered her rifle, breathing hard. "We're not done," she said. "No," he agreed. "They'll return with others." "This place is not safe." He retrieved the fallen envelope from where it had been tucked inside her coat earlier, checking the seal. It was cracked now, soaked from the rain. The paper inside, though, was dry enough to read. The mark of a wealthy rancher. The list of parcels claimed under false witness, signatures forged and sealed with bribes. The chief's voice was low. "These papers are not only proof, they are a weapon. That's why I need to get them to the sheriff," she said. "If I make it before sundown." He studied her for a long moment, the morning light cutting across his face. "The sheriff will not help you." She frowned. "You don't know that." He turned his gaze toward the east. "I know the kind of law that writes with two hands, one for the people, one for gold." Her jaw clenched. "Then what do you suggest?" "Burn the proof. Pretend none of it happened." He didn't answer immediately. The wind picked up again, scattering dust across the trail below. "No," he said at last. "You keep it, but not for him, for the truth that comes after." She looked down at the envelope, fingers tightening around it. The weight of it seemed heavier than before. "And what if I don't live to tell it?" "Then someone will find your story," he said, "written in what you chose to do." The words hung between them. For the first time since she'd arrived, the cowgirl's eyes softened. "You sound like a man who's lost something worth fighting for." He didn't look at her. "Everyone here has." Below, a distant echo carried through the canyon. More horses. Dozens this time. The chief straightened, stringing his bow again. "They returned sooner than I thought," he said. The cowgirl chambered another round, glancing toward the open desert. "Then we ride or we die here." He gave a small nod. "Then we ride." The two moved swiftly down the slope, the first rays of full morning striking their backs. Behind them, the riders gathered like dark insects against the horizon, closing in on the canyon mouth. The chief mounted first, then offered her his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. The moment their horses broke into the open, The desert wind rose again, carrying dust, sunlight, and the echo of their flight, two shadows bound by danger, riding toward a truth neither could yet see. The desert stretched wide and merciless before them. The storm had scrubbed the sky clean, leaving a harsh blue that burned at the horizon. Wind drove dust across the flats, biting their faces and blurring the line between earth and air. The Apache chief rode ahead, scanning for shelter. His horse's stride was steady, muscles rippling beneath the sun-dark hide. Behind him, the cowgirl's mount stumbled, hooves striking loose stones. She urged it on, though her breath came ragged. Every hoofbeat carried the sound of pursuit. "Can't hold this pace much longer," she called. The chief slowed, glancing back. "We make for the ridge." "There's shade and stone enough to cover us," she nodded, pushing through the ache in her legs. The ridge rose ahead, jagged, sun-bleached, scarred with old markings. They reached a narrow cut between two walls of rock and dismounted. The horses snorted, slick with sweat. The chief gathered handfuls of dry grass, brushing away their tracks. The cowgirl leaned against her saddle, catching her breath. "How many behind us, you think?" "Too many," he said simply. "Enough to forget mercy." She gave a dry laugh. "That sounds about right." They led the horses into the shadow of the ridge, where the heat softened. From here, they could see the vast plain stretching behind them, the faint smudge of riders moving slow but steady. The cowgirl's hands shook as she reached for her canteen. "We'll run out of water before nightfall," she said. The chief pointed toward the east slope. "There's a spring beneath that rock face." "You'll hear it before you see it." She hesitated. "You sure?" He met her eyes. "I know this land, every sound it makes." She went. The air cooled slightly near the rocks, and after a few steps, she heard it, the faint trickle of water beneath stone. She knelt, brushing aside sand until a thin stream appeared, cold against her fingers. She drank greedily, then filled both canteens and returned. The chief sat cross-legged beside a small pile of stones, eyes closed, lips moving in silent words. She set the water beside him. "Praying?" He opened his eyes, calm but distant, listening. "To what?" "The ground, it keeps what men forget." She studied him a moment. "And what's it saying now?" He glanced toward the open plain. "That the wind carries more than dust. They follow not only you." Her brows drew together. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured for her to sit. "You said you took something that wasn't theirs to keep. You told truth. But there's more." Her throat tightened. "There's always more." He waited. She looked away, eyes narrowing toward the sun. "Those papers I showed you, they weren't just stolen deeds. One of them, it proves a murder. The rancher signed over land belonging to a native family after they vanished. Disappeared overnight. Sheriff said they moved on." She swallowed. "They didn't." The chief's face didn't change, but his silence grew heavier. "They buried them," she said softly. "An old woman told me before they burned her barn. She said the earth never forgets where the innocent lie. So I dug. I found bones, small ones." The wind shifted again, moaning through the canyon cut. He stood slowly, eyes fixed on the horizon. "That land, where was it?" "South Ridge, near White Mesa." He turned back to her. For the first time, something flickered behind his calm, a wound reopening. "My family was there," he said. She froze. "They came before dawn," he continued quietly. "Men with torches, saying the treaty meant nothing. My brother stayed to fight. My sister took her children into the hills. None came back." He paused, voice lowering further. "We buried what we could find. The rest became ghosts on the wind." The cowgirl's chest tightened. "Then you know why I couldn't let them keep those papers." He nodded slowly. "Now I know why you ride like death follows you." For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of distant hooves broke the silence. The riders were closer now, still faint, but no longer a mirage. "They'll find this place," she said. "Yes. Then we move again." He looked toward the rising cliffs. "No, we stand." Her eyes widened. "There's too many." He unrolled a leather pouch from his saddle, revealing flint, dried resin, and two long strips of cloth. Fire runs faster than horses when the wind is right. She caught his meaning. You'll smoke them out. He met her gaze. We give them what they deserve, fear in their own language. Together, they worked quickly, spreading resin along the ridge edge, threading cloth through the brush. The heat shimmered above them. The smell of pitch rose thick in the air. By the time the first riders appeared at the base of the slope, the sun was high and merciless. The chief struck the flint. A spark caught, then flared. Flames raced through the brush, leaping from stone to stone. Smoke poured upward, twisting in the wind like a living thing. The riders shouted, reining their horses in panic. The cowgirl watched them scatter, faces pale beneath their hats. She turned toward the chief, the firelight flickering in her eyes. You're not just fighting for me. No, he said. I fight for what was taken. The fire roared higher, the smoke thickening until the world blurred. Somewhere beyond it came the sound of gunfire, wild, aimless, swallowed by the storm they had made. The cowgirl gripped her rifle, heart pounding, waiting for what would break through the smoke first, friend, foe, or fate itself. The smoke thinned as the wind shifted, sweeping the fire eastward across the ridge. Beneath the choking haze, the chief and the cowgirl stumbled through a narrow ravine, half blind, half running. The heat licked their backs, the sound of crackling brush chasing them like angry spirits. They didn't speak. The desert did all the talking. Stones clattered underfoot, dry roots snapped. A hawk shrieked somewhere high above, lost in the whirl of rising smoke. When they finally broke free into open air, both bent double, gasping. The cowgirl wiped soot from her face. That'll slow them down, she said. The chief straightened, scanning the horizon. Or drive them mad enough to follow through the fire. He wasn't wrong. Behind them, faint shapes moved through the haze, men coughing, shouting, cursing. One fired a shot that whined past the rocks and buried itself in sand. Keep moving, he said. They don't stop until the ground gives out beneath them. They pressed on, winding deeper into the canyons where the air grew still and cool. The path narrowed until only one could walk at a time. The cowgirl went first, ducking under a low arch of stone. Sunlight filtered through the cracks above, slicing the darkness into ribbons. She turned back once. You sure this way leads anywhere? He nodded. It leads where few are willing to go. What's there? He stepped closer, his voice low. Old land, sacred once, cursed, they say, now. She gave a short laugh. Guess cursed is safer than chaste. The canyon walls widened again, opening to a dry basin scattered with boulders and the remains of what might have been an ancient dwelling. Stones stacked in a circle, charred long ago. The cowgirl slowed, taking it in. People lived here. Long before the maps, he said, before anyone thought to draw lines across the dust. She knelt, brushing dirt from a smooth stone. Symbols carved deep into its surface caught the light. Spirals, arrows, the shape of a hand. Yours? She asked. He hesitated. My mother's people. They built fires here to keep the world in balance. Then the soldiers came and said the land had no owner. She looked up at him, eyes soft. You lost more than I can understand. He didn't reply. The silence between them was full of everything words couldn't hold. A vulture circled above, drifting in the rising thermals. The cowgirl's gaze followed it. We can't stay long, she said. Once they realize we doubled back, they'll search every canyon in this range. He nodded, walking to the far side of the basin, where a dry creek bed cut through the rock. He crouched, running his fingers through the pale sand. There's water below, he said, hidden but close enough to dig. They worked together, hands blistering, until damp earth surfaced. She smiled faintly. Guess the desert's not all dead after all. He met her eyes. Not if you know where to listen. For a time, the only sound was the rhythm of their digging and the whisper of wind across stone. When water finally seeped up through the cracks, they both paused, kneeling in the shallow pool as if in prayer. She took a slow drink, then sat back, looking toward the north. You ever think about leaving, going somewhere none of this can find you? His gaze followed hers. There's nowhere the wind doesn't carry stories. Even silence remembers. She smiled, tired but genuine. That sounds like a no. He didn't return it, but the corner of his mouth shifted, just enough to show he'd understood. Then a sound cut through the stillness. A single echoing crack, gunfire rolling off the canyon walls. She froze. They found us. He was already moving, grabbing his bow. Stay low. The rocks will give us cover. They scrambled behind a jut of stone as bullets sparked against the ridge. Dust filled the air. Voices shouted orders, closing in from the south. The chief leaned close. They drive us uphill, toward the open ground. They'll want to trap us against the sun. Then we turn before the ridge, she said. There's a cut back toward the basin. He looked at her with new respect. You know these canyons. Lived near enough, she said. Hunted here before men came to claim it. Another shot rang out, striking close enough to scatter pebbles across her boots. She exhaled hard. Guess that was my warning. The chief raised his bow, firing once. A distant cry answered him. Then silence again. Heavy, tense, waiting. He turned to her. They'll come slower now. They think we bleed. She wiped her face, grit smearing across her skin. Let them think it. Gives us time. They moved together, slipping through the narrow cut, feet silent on the sand. The canyon turned sharply, rising toward a plateau. The sun was climbing fast now, light pouring down the walls like fire. At the top, the view opened wide, the desert stretching endless and bright. She stopped, chest heaving, staring at the horizon. Where do we go from here? He looked east, where the mountains shimmered faintly through the heat. There's an old outpost, long abandoned, maybe still standing. And if it's not, he adjusted the bow across his shoulder. So then the earth will take us before they do. The wind rose again, pulling at their clothes, lifting the scent of smoke from the valley below. She turned to look back once more. Through the haze, she could just make out movement, shapes on horseback, still hunting, still closing the distance. She whispered almost to herself, "They'll never stop." The chief's voice was calm, certain. "Then neither will we." They mounted again, turning toward the shimmer of heat ahead, riding hard into the horizon where the land met the sky. Two fading figures chased by fire, dust, and the memory of everything they'd both already lost. The outpost appeared like a mirage at the far edge of the basin, its outline warped by heat, walls slumped in the red dust. Once, it had been a station for riders and drifters, but now only the wind kept company there. The Apache chief slowed his horse and raised a hand. "We rest here." The cowgirl shaded her eyes against the glare. "Looks half buried. Half is more than none." They dismounted, moving carefully through the silence. The wooden beams were grey with sun. Roofs caved in, doors swinging loose. A rusted sign still clung to one wall, letters worn to ghosts. She ran a hand over the wood. "Place feels forgotten." The chief glanced around. Forgotten things are quiet. Quiet things keep secrets. Inside, the air was cool and dry. The faint smell of old leather and ashes lingered. A broken cot leaned in the corner, an empty bottle rolled across the floor. The cowgirl crouched to pick up a torn piece of cloth, a flag, maybe, or part of a uniform. "Army," he nodded. "They built it, then left when the ground gave nothing back." She dusted off a table and set down the envelope. "Feels strange," she murmured. "Running for something made of paper, hiding in a place built by the same hands that took everything from you." He didn't answer. He moved to a cracked window, watching the horizon. No movement yet, only heat shimmering. Still, his posture stayed tense. "You think they'll find us?" she asked. "They always find what they believe belongs to them." She sighed, sitting against the wall. "You ever get tired of fighting ghosts?" He looked at her. "You can't tire of what never leaves." Her gaze dropped to the envelope. "Those men, the ones chasing us, they work for someone who thinks this land is still his. That seal on the papers, it's his family's mark. They'll keep riding until they take them back." He turned from the window. "Then we must decide what the papers are worth." She stared at him. "Worth? They prove the truth." He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Truth buried in the desert still dies if no one lives to tell it." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. For the first time since she'd met him, doubt crept into her face. He sat opposite her, setting his bow aside. "You fight like one of us," he said, "but you still believe someone will listen when you bring proof to their table." She rubbed her hands together, dirt and sweat streaking her skin. I have to believe it. Otherwise, everything I've done means nothing. For a moment, they sat in silence, listening to the wind moving through cracks in the wood. Then he said, almost gently, "Belief is not nothing." She looked up at him, eyes catching the faint light. "And what do you believe?" "That the land keeps what men forget," he said. "If we fall, the wind will still carry our story. But if you live, maybe someone hears it before it fades." The way he said it made her chest tighten. She realized he was no longer thinking of himself. Outside, the sky shifted. Clouds gathered low, heavy and grey. The smell of rain came again, sharp and familiar. She stood, moving to the doorway. "Another storm?" He joined her. "The desert never forgets twice." She gave a half smile. "Then maybe it's giving us cover." They worked quickly. He gathered what scraps of cloth and oil he could find, packing them near the entrance. She checked the rifle, hands steady despite the ache in her arms. As the wind picked up, she spoke without looking at him. "When this is done, if we make it to town, what will you do?" He considered before answering. "I will see the graves of my family. Then I will decide if peace still exists." Her throat tightened. "And if it doesn't, then I will make some for them, even if I can't keep it for myself." Rain began to fall in fine lines through the doorway. It hissed against the sand, soft but relentless. The cowgirl stepped closer to the table, pressing her palm against the envelope. "You could come with me," she said quietly. "See that truth yourself." He shook his head. "My path ends before walls. Yours begins behind them." The words settled between them, heavy as the air. Then came the sound they both dreaded. Hooves on wet ground, echoing through the basin, dozens, maybe more. She looked at him. "How many chances do we get to change a story?" He strung his bow, eyes calm again. "Only one, but sometimes one is enough." Lightning flared outside, splitting the grey. Shadows of riders flickered against the light. The chief stepped into the doorway, the wind lifting the edge of his cloak. The cowgirl stood beside him, rifle ready, heart steady. Rain poured harder. The first shout rang out across the flat. "Inside," she hissed. He didn't move. "No," he said softly. "They'll expect that." He reached down, struck the match, and dropped it into the oil-soaked cloth by the door. The flame caught instantly, racing along the edge of the outpost. "Now they see us," he said. She met his eyes through the growing firelight, understanding the plan without another word. The blaze roared up, filling the doorway, casting their silhouettes tall and defiant against the storm. Outside, the riders charged forward, straight into the light. The outpost burned like a beacon in the storm. Rain hissed against the flames, steam rising in white curls that wrapped around the old timbers. Through the smoke, shapes charged forward, men on horseback, their coats dark, rifles flashing under the lightning. The chief stood in the doorway, half shadow, half fire. His bow sang once, twice, each arrow finding its mark. The cowgirl fired beside him, the rifle's report cracking through the rain. Wood splintered. Horses screamed. "They're circling!" she shouted. "Let them," he called back. "Fire drives them where fear already points." He moved to the other window, loosed another arrow. A rider fell, dragging his horse down into the mud. Another scrambled behind a cart, firing wildly toward the flames. Bullets ripped through the air, shattering the doorframe inches from the chief's shoulder. The cowgirl ducked, reloading fast. Her hands were slick with rain and soot. "We can't hold them all." He turned, calm even now. "Then we hold until we can't." Lightning struck nearby, throwing everything into white silence. When the thunder rolled away, the sound that followed wasn't hoofbeats, it was wind. Hard, furious wind that tore the fire upward into a spiral, spreading smoke thick as night. The riders faltered. Visibility vanished. The chief grabbed her arm. "Now!" They broke from the back wall, slipping through the smoke and rain. The chief's hand never left her shoulder. He guided her through the chaos like a man who'd lived inside storms his whole life. Behind them, the flames devoured the outpost. They ran until their lungs burned, until the sound of pursuit blurred into the storm. The rain began to ease, leaving the desert soaked and silent. When they stopped, both were shaking, not from cold, but from what they'd escaped. The cowgirl bent over, gasping, "They'll think we burned in it." "Let them think so," he said. She straightened, wiping ash from her face. Her hat was gone. Her hair clung wet to her neck. "You planned that, didn't you?" "Burning the place, letting them see." He met her eyes. They needed to believe the story was over. Her lips curved, faintly. "Smart." He looked east. The first dim light of morning was pushing through the storm clouds. "We ride before the sun climbs. If they find the trail again, they'll come from the north." She hesitated, and then... He didn't answer. The silence stretched until she finally asked, "You mean to leave me?" He didn't look back. "Your road leads to the town, mine does not." Her voice lowered. "You saved me. You don't have to disappear into this desert." He turned then, slow and deliberate. "I was already gone when you found me." The words hit like a blade dulled by sorrow. She stepped closer. "You don't have to stay gone." He looked past her to the horizon, where the last line of smoke faded into pale sky. "If you reach the town," he said quietly, "give the papers to someone who cannot be bought. If no one will listen, burn them. The fire will speak for us." She shook her head. "There's got to be another way." He gave a small, tired smile. "There's always another way, but not always for us." She started to argue, then stopped. His calm wasn't resignation. It was something heavier, shaped by too many losses. "You're not coming with me, are you?" He took a step back, lifting the reins. "No, but the wind will carry your story farther than you think." Rain dripped from the edge of his cloak as he mounted. The cowgirl stood watching him, chest rising with unspoken words. "Chief," she said finally, "why help me at all?" He looked down at her, eyes dark and steady. "Because once someone asked me for help the same way, and I didn't answer fast enough." Then he turned his horse toward the ridge. She wanted to call out, to stop him, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she reached into her coat, pulling out the envelope. The paper was damp, edges curled, but the seal was still there. She held it against her chest, whispering to the wind, "Then I'll answer for both of us." The chief rode until his figure blurred into the mist. She watched until there was nothing left but the quiet. Then she looked toward the distant line of the town, the faint promise of roofs under the clouds. Her horse stamped the ground impatiently. She took one last glance at the scorched horizon and mounted. As she rode east, thunder rolled once more, soft this time, like a memory fading. The desert behind her steamed and smoked, but in that smoke rose something new, something that smelled like freedom and grief sharing the same breath. And though she didn't know it, far to the north the riders had found the ruins of the outpost, burned beyond recognition. One of them lifted a charred hat from the mud and spat. "They're gone," he said. But in the ashes, half buried under blackened boards, a single arrow still glowed faintly in the heat, its feathers untouched by fire. By noon the clouds had broken. The desert shimmered beneath the heat again, as though the storm had been only a fever dream. The cowgirl rode slow now, her shoulders hunched, every muscle sore from the chase. The town was still a smudge on the horizon, a cluster of roofs, a church steeple, a promise of rest that didn't feel safe. The envelope pressed against her chest, warm through her shirt. It felt heavier the closer she got. By the time she reached the outskirts, the sun had begun to dip west. She passed a windmill turning lazy circles, a fence half collapsed under sand. A dog barked once, then went silent. The main street lay mostly empty except for the slow sway of the saloon doors and a man sweeping dust that never stopped coming back. She dismounted, boots striking the boards with hollow thuds. A few eyes watched her from windows, tired eyes, curious but not friendly. She led her horse to the trough, let it drink, then straightened her hat and walked toward the sheriff's office. The sign above the door read Law, though half the paint had peeled away. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old sweat. The sheriff looked up from his desk, squinting against the light. He was older, heavy around the middle, but his eyes were sharp enough to make her pause. "Afternoon," he said. "You look like you've been through a war." She didn't smile. "You could say that." He leaned back. What brings you here? She set the envelope on his desk. Proof. Of land theft. Murder. You'll want to read it before you ask questions. He looked at it but didn't reach. You've come a long way for paperwork. I've come to make things right. That made him grin, slow and dry. Right's a funny word around here. The way he said it made her stomach twist. You'll file it, she asked. Investigate? He tapped the edge of the envelope with one finger. Depends who it's against. The Brandt family, she said. Out near White Mesa. His grin didn't move, but the room seemed to tighten. You sure you want to put your name on that? I didn't come this far to stay quiet. He sighed, picking up the envelope. For a moment, she thought he might actually read it, but then he opened the drawer and slid it inside. Her voice sharpened. That's evidence. That's paper, he said, closing the drawer. And you're bringing trouble where folks already got enough. She stepped forward. They killed people for that land. He stood, eyes level with hers now, and half the town works for them. You want me to hang my own roof? Her pulse pounded. So that's it. You just look the other way. I look where the light pays me to, he said quietly. The words hit harder than a blow. She stared at him, the room shrinking, air thick with dust and betrayal. You're no lawman. I'm what passes for one, he said. Best ride before the Brandts hear your name. She backed away, anger rising hot and sharp. I'll find someone who listens. He gave a slow shake of his head. You'll find a bullet before that, miss. She turned and left without another word. Outside, the light was fading fast. The street had gone still again, too still. Somewhere behind her, a door creaked open. She didn't look back. She went straight for the stable, throwing her saddle over the horse's back with shaking hands. Her throat burned with anger, but underneath it was something colder, disappointment that felt like grief. The Apache chief had been right. She tightened the cinch, swung up into the saddle, and rode out before full dark. The town faded behind her, lights flickering in windows that no longer looked like safety. Miles passed. The desert swallowed her again. But the echo of the sheriff's words followed close, like ghosts riding on the wind. She didn't notice the riders at first, not until moonlight flashed off metal far behind her. 3, maybe 4, moving fast. She pushed her horse harder, cutting toward the rocky hills. By the time she reached the first rise, she could see torchlight dancing in the distance. The same men. They hadn't died in the fire after all. Her heart pounded. She turned the horse toward the ravine, knowing it was a gamble. Narrow trails, blind turns, but there was no choice. Halfway down, the horse stumbled, nearly falling. She steadied it, muttering under her breath, "Come on, just a little farther." The torches drew closer. Voices carried, "She's alive. Take her, papers and all." The sound spurred her forward. Rocks clattered under hoof. She didn't see the figure until she rounded the bend, a shadow stepping into the moonlight, tall, motionless, bow in hand. The horse reared. She pulled hard on the reins, heart leaping. He stood calm as ever, cloak dark against the pale stone. The chief, he'd never left the desert. For a moment neither spoke. Then he said, "You found the truth." "I found the kind of truth no one wants," she said, breathless. His eyes flicked past her toward the torchlight climbing fast. "Then we finish it." She swallowed hard. "Together?" He nodded once. As it was meant to be. The riders crested the ridge. Gunfire split the night. She wheeled her horse beside him, raised the rifle, and fired into the dark. The first man fell. The others fanned out, shouting. The chief drew his bow and let an arrow fly, clean, silent, precise. Another rider dropped. They moved as one, fire and wind against the night, until the gunfire thinned and the torches flickered out. The last echo faded. Smoke from the torches mingled with dust, curling upward toward the stars. The cowgirl lowered her rifle, chest heaving. "Is it over?" The chief looked at the horizon where dawn threatened again. "No," he said quietly, "but it's beginning to end." Dawn crept slow and blood-colored over the ridges. The rain had gone, leaving the ground dark and heavy. Smoke from the spent torches drifted low, clinging to the sage. The Apache chief and the cowgirl waited behind a fallen bluff, breath steady, eyes fixed on the figures approaching through the gray light. There were only 3 riders left now. Their faces were streaked with soot, their coats torn. The leader rode ahead, hat pulled low, one arm bound with a strip of cloth black with dried blood. His voice carried across the silence. "Come out, you've run far enough." The cowgirl's hands tightened on the rifle. "That's Mason Brandt," she whispered. "The old man's eldest son." The chief gave a single nod. "Then the storm brings its name at last." Brandt dismounted, boots sinking in the wet sand. "You've got something belongs to my family," he called. "You hand it over, and maybe I let you live to see noon." The cowgirl rose from behind the rocks, rifle steady. "Your family took what never belonged to them," she said. "I've got proof." She pulled the envelope from her coat, holding it high so the morning light struck the seal. Brandt's smile was thin. "Proof don't mean much when the man reading it's on my payroll." The chief stepped beside her, silent as shadow. Brandt's gaze flicked to him, then back. "You again," he said. "Heard you died years ago." "Not yet," the chief said. Brandt spat into the dirt. "You're both already ghosts. You just don't know it." He motioned to the other riders. They spread out, rifles ready. The air turned sharp, electric, like the second before lightning. The cowgirl's heart hammered. She whispered to the chief, "If I fall, you take it. Don't let them win." His eyes stayed on the men ahead. No one falls alone. The first shot cracked. Dust exploded near her boots. She dropped, rolled behind the bluff, and returned fire. The chief moved low, fast, loosing an arrow that caught one rider clean through the chest. The man toppled backward, disappearing behind his horse. The second rider fired wildly, bullets sparking off stone. The cowgirl leaned around the edge, squeezed the trigger, and saw the man spin, rifle slipping from his grasp. That left Brandt. He advanced slowly, gun drawn, but not firing. "You think you're some kind of savior, girl? You're just another fool playing hero in someone else's story." She stood, the rifle aimed square at him. "Maybe, but at least I picked the right side." He cocked the hammer. "There's no right side, just winners." Before he could fire, the chief stepped between them. "Then win without the gun," he said. Brandt laughed. "A fair fight, from you." The chief didn't answer. He let the bow fall and raised his empty hands. The desert went quiet again, save for the wind whispering through the brush. Brandt hesitated, then holstered his pistol and drew a knife. "Fine," he said. "Let's see what ghosts bleed." They circled each other. The cowgirl stood frozen, watching the 2 men close the distance, steel flashing once, twice. The fight was silent, but for the scrape of boots on stone. Brandt lunged, slashing high. The chief caught his wrist, twisted, drove his shoulder into the man's chest. They hit the ground hard. The knife clattered free. Brandt swung a fist, caught the chief across the jaw, but the older man didn't fall back. He grappled, driving the heel of his hand into Brandt's throat. The sound that followed was short, choked. Brandt staggered, eyes wide. The chief rose over him, breathing hard, then stepped back. "End it," the cowgirl said softly. The chief looked at Brandt, at the man gasping in the dirt. "The earth ends what it must." He turned away. Brandt coughed, dragging himself toward the dropped pistol. The cowgirl saw the motion first. "Chief!" The shot broke the morning apart. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Brandt fell forward, a dark bloom spreading through his coat. Smoke drifted from the barrel of the cowgirl's rifle. She stood shaking, the sound of the shot still echoing through her bones. "He would have killed you," she said. The chief nodded once. "Then you did what the law would not." They stood there a long time, listening as the desert settled. Far off, a hawk cried once, circling over the still shape on the ground. When she finally spoke, her voice was low. "What happens now?" He looked toward the rising sun. "You ride to the border. Find someone who'll print what's in that paper. Let the wind carry the rest." She stared at the envelope, then at him. "You could come." "My place is here," he said. "There are still graves that need names." She swallowed, eyes stinging. "Then thank you for everything." He gave a slight nod. "Ride with the dawn. The world listens clearer then." She mounted slowly, the horse shifting beneath her. The first light caught on the rifle slung at her back, on the tired but steady set of her shoulders. When she glanced over one last time, The chief was already walking toward the horizon, his shadow long against the sand. The sun climbed higher, burning away what was left of the night. Behind them the wind rose, scattering the last of the smoke and carrying it east, toward towns that would never know their names, only their story. The road east shimmered under the noonday sun, turning the horizon into a mirage that never came closer. The cowgirl rode in silence, her horse's hooves striking the hardpan in a slow, steady rhythm. Each step carried her farther from the canyon, from the fire, from the man who had saved her more than once. The envelope rested against her chest, pressed close beneath her shirt. It felt like a living thing now, pulsing with the weight of every soul that had burned or bled for it. She'd promised the chief she'd deliver it. That promise was the only thing keeping her upright. By dusk, the outline of a small town rose from the heat. Not much. Just a rail stop, a saloon, a post office, and a single building with a sign that read, Press and Ledger. The cowgirl slowed, scanning the street. People moved like shadows, tired and suspicious, the kind that had learned not to look too long at strangers. She dismounted and tied her horse outside the printing shop. Through the open window came the soft, rhythmic clatter of type bars, metal keys striking ink into truth. She pushed the door open. Inside, a thin man sat hunched over a press, sleeves rolled to the elbows, spectacles perched low on his nose. He glanced up when she entered. "We're closed unless you've got a story worth the ink." "I do," she said. Her voice was steady, though her heart wasn't. He studied her, eyes sharp behind the glass. "Everyone thinks they do." She stepped closer and set the envelope on his desk. "Not like this one." He raised a brow, slid a finger under the seal, and opened it. As he read, his expression changed. First curiosity, then disbelief, then something close to fear. "These are deeds," he murmured. "Maps, signatures from the governor's office. Proof the Brants forged every claim west of the river." He looked up. "You know what happens if I print this?" She nodded. "That's why I brought it." He leaned back, rubbing his chin. "You'll have half the territory gunning for you before the ink dries." "I already do." He gave a dry laugh, but there was respect in it. "You sound like a woman with nothing left to lose." She met his gaze. "Maybe that's what it takes to tell the truth." He held her stare for a moment, then nodded. "All right, it'll take time to set it proper. You'll stay here tonight, safer inside than out." She hesitated. "I can't stay long. There are men still hunting." "Then I'll work faster," he said, already reaching for the press lever. She found a chair near the window, exhaustion finally catching up. The rhythmic hiss of the machine filled the room, a sound both soothing and relentless. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the shutters. For the first time in days, she let herself breathe. But peace didn't last long. Near midnight, a noise came from the street, a slow creak of wagon wheels, the faint jingle of spurs. She moved to the window, careful not to make a sound. 3 riders dismounted outside the saloon, faces hidden beneath wide-brimmed hats. She recognized one of them even through the dark, Brant's second, the one who'd escaped the canyon. Her stomach tightened. She turned to the printer. "They're here." He froze mid-motion. "You sure? I never forget the sound of men who mean to kill." He swallowed, eyes darting toward the door. "Back room. Now." They slipped behind the press, through a curtain into a narrow storage space lined with paper stacks and ink barrels. The printer drew a small revolver from a drawer. His hands shook. "You armed?" She nodded, lifting her rifle. "Always." Outside, boots thudded on the porch. A voice called out, "We're looking for a woman, traveling alone." "Rode in before sundown." The printer whispered, "What do we do?" "We wait," she said. The door creaked open. Floorboards groaned under heavy steps. Someone kicked the counter, scattering tools. "She's here somewhere," one man said. "Search it all." Footsteps neared the curtain. The cowgirl raised her rifle, breath held. When the first shadow broke through the fabric, she fired. The man fell hard, the shot echoing through the room. Shouts followed. The second man burst through, firing wildly. The printer ducked behind the press, returning a shaky shot that found its mark. The room filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. The last rider tried the back door, But the cowgirl was already there. She hit him once, hard enough to drop him to his knees, then pressed the barrel to his chest. "Who sent you?" she demanded. He spat blood. "Brant's father. Wants what's his." She hesitated. "He's dead." The man's grin was cruel. Old men don't die easy. Before she could ask more, his eyes went wide, then blank. A single arrow jutted from his back. The cowgirl froze. From the shadows outside, the Apache chief stepped into the dim light, his bow lowered, his eyes unreadable. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I said I would see it done," he replied. She felt something tighten in her throat. Relief, disbelief, something between. "You followed me." "I followed the wind," he said, "and it led here." The printer stared unspeechless. "You two bring trouble like thunder." The chief looked at him. "Then print fast, before the storm finds you." He nodded and returned to his work, hands trembling but determined. The press groaned to life again, each turn of the wheel a heartbeat of defiance. The cowgirl and the chief stood guard by the door, weapons ready, watching as the first sheets rolled out, black ink on white paper, carrying the truth across the page. When dawn broke, the first copies lay drying on the counter. The headline read, "Land stolen, territory built on lies. Brant family exposed." The cowgirl picked one up, staring at the words through tears she didn't mean to shed. "It's done," she said softly. The chief nodded. "No. It's begun." Outside, the wind carried the scent of dust and ink. The desert was waking again, and this time it would remember. By noon, the story was everywhere. Boys ran through the muddy streets shouting the headline, waving still wet papers in the air. Farmers at the feed store stopped mid-conversation to read aloud. The saloon went quiet as men crowded around a single copy, tracing the black letters with calloused fingers. The name Brant rolled off tongues like a curse. At the printing office, the cowgirl leaned against the doorframe, watching the town awaken to truth. For the first time since she'd left the canyon, the air didn't feel heavy. It felt dangerous, but honest. The printer moved back and forth between the press and the counter, sweat streaking his face. "Never seen folks read so fast," he said. "Never seen 'em this angry, neither." The cowgirl managed a small smile. "Anger's better than silence." "Maybe," he said, glancing through the window, "but silence don't shoot back." Out on the far edge of town, dust rose, a dozen riders heading in fast. The cowgirl saw it first and tensed. "They're coming," the printer swore under his breath. "Brant's men." The Apache chief stepped out from the back room, bow in hand, calm as the horizon. "Then the truth rides quicker than I thought." The cowgirl turned to him. "For you stayed when you could have left." He looked past her, toward the approaching riders. "A story half told dies young. We finish it." The riders thundered into town, hooves striking sparks from the hard ground. They scattered the boys selling papers, tore headlines from hands, crushed them into the mud. The townsfolk backed away, doors slamming shut one after another. At their head rode the patriarch himself, Elias Brant, pale and hard-eyed, white hair streaming under his black hat. His voice cut through the square like a knife. "Where's the one who printed this filth?" No one answered. Only the wind and the rustle of paper drifting down the street. The cowgirl stepped forward. "Right here." The crowd held its breath. Brant's gaze locked on her. "You." His voice shook, not from weakness, but from rage too long buried. "You don't know what you've done." She met his stare. "I know exactly what I've done." He nodded to his men. "Take her." But before they could move, the chief appeared beside her, silent as a shadow. His voice was low, steady. "You'll have to walk through both of us." Brant's lip curled. "You think you scare me, savage? My family built this land." The chief's eyes didn't waver. "No. You only buried what was already here." A murmur rippled through the watching townsfolk. Someone shouted, "She told the truth." Another voice answered, "Let 'em speak." Brant turned toward the crowd, fury twisting his face. "You'd take the word of strangers over mine." The printer stepped from the doorway, holding one of the papers high. "Not strangers," he said. "Witnesses." For the first time, Brant hesitated. He saw the eyes around him, not loyal anymore, not afraid, just awake. He drew his pistol. "Then witnesses can burn." The shot cracked. But it wasn't the cowgirl who fell. The chief had moved first, shoving her aside. The bullet caught him high in the shoulder, spinning him backward. He staggered but stayed on his feet, blood running dark beneath the torn cloth. The cowgirl raised her rifle, firing back. The bullet struck Brant's hat clean off his head, grazing his temple. He reeled, dropped his gun. The crowd erupted. Farmers, miners, and townsfolk surged forward, shouting, grabbing at the riders' reins. Two of Brant's men fired into the air before being pulled from their saddles. Horses bolted. The cowgirl rushed to the chief's side, catching him as he sank to one knee. "You're hit," she said, panic in her voice. He shook his head, teeth clenched. "It's nothing. Don't lie to me." He looked up at her, eyes fierce despite the pain. "It's a wound worth earning." Elias Brant struggled to rise, reaching for his fallen pistol. The cowgirl stepped between him and the gun. "It's over," she said. He sneered. "You think this ends with me? You can't kill a name." She stared down at him, anger and pity warring inside her. "No," she said softly. "But you can take the land back from it." The crowd closed in, men shouting, women crying. Brant's gun hand trembled. For a moment, it seemed he might raise it again, but his strength failed. The pistol slipped from his grip, clattering to the ground. The sheriff, face pale, hands shaking, pushed through the throng. "I'll take him," he said, though his voice carried no authority now. The cowgirl stepped aside, letting him pass. "Do your job," she said quietly. He met her eyes, then nodded once. "Maybe this time I will." As the men dragged Brant away, the cowgirl turned back to the chief. His wound had soaked through the cloth, but his gaze stayed fixed on the rising sun over the rooftops. "You kept your word," she said. He gave a faint smile. "So did you." The printer knelt beside them, voice rough. Papers already spreading. Folks are sending riders east with copies. The story's gone. "Good," the chief murmured. "Let it ride farther than we ever could." The crowd began to disperse, whispers filling the air. Someone started a small fire in the square, not to burn the truth, but to warm the hands of those who'd finally seen it. The cowgirl helped the chief to his feet. He swayed once, then straightened. "The land will remember this day," he said. She nodded, eyes glinting with pride. "And so will we." They walked together toward the edge of town, where the desert waited, open, endless, and alive again. Behind them, the press kept running. Each page that rolled out was a heartbeat, a voice, a promise that silence would never rule this land again. The sun stood high, burning white over the town. The air shimmered with heat, smoke, and dust kicked up by too many boots moving in confusion. The Brant patriarch had been dragged off, but the weight of his name still clung to the streets like smoke that refused to clear. The Apache chief sat outside the printing office, his back against the wall, breath slow but labored. Blood darkened the cloth at his shoulder. The cowgirl knelt beside him, pressing a fresh strip of linen over the wound. "You've lost too much," she said. He shook his head. "Not enough to stop breathing." "Don't joke," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. "If I don't, the pain will talk for me." The street had gone strangely quiet. Townsfolk lingered at windows, watching but saying nothing. The sheriff was gone. Whether to fetch a doctor or flee responsibility, no one knew. Only the hum of the press still rolled through the doorway, turning truth into pages that fluttered like prayer flags in the wind. The cowgirl's hands shook as she tied the bandage. "You said the land remembers." "What about the ones it takes?" He opened his eyes, the calm of a man who'd seen too many storms. "Then we remember for it." Something changed in the air then, a stillness before sound, the kind of silence that came before thunder or death. The chief's head lifted. "They're not done," he said. The cowgirl stood, scanning the horizon. From the south, another line of riders approached, dark, purposeful. A black carriage rolled behind them, its wheels glinting in the sunlight. She exhaled sharply. "It's him." The chief's brow furrowed. "The father still breathes." "Barely," she said, "but a man like that don't die until he takes someone with him." The riders slowed as they reached the square. The carriage door opened, and Elias Brant, pale as bone, stepped out, coat blood-stained but his voice strong as ever. "You should have let it end this morning," he called. But mercy's a fool's game. The cowgirl's hand went to her rifle. You don't have men enough to stop what's begun. Brant laughed, a harsh, broken sound. I don't need men, I just need you. He raised a revolver, silver catching the light. The crowd gasped and scattered. The cowgirl froze. The chief, though wounded, rose to his feet, stepping in front of her again. Move, Brant warned. The chief didn't. His voice was steady as the earth. This land is not yours to die on. Brant's hand trembled. You took everything I built. No, the chief said. You built your house on bones. The gun fired. The sound cracked through the square like lightning. The chief staggered back, eyes wide. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he fell to one knee. The cowgirl caught him before he hit the ground, her cry lost to the echo. The gun still smoked in Brant's hand. She rose, every muscle burning, face streaked with tears and dust. You wanted a witness, she shouted. Here I am. She fired. The shot struck true. Brant stumbled backward, eyes wide in disbelief, then collapsed against the side of the carriage. The revolver slipped from his grasp, sinking into the dust. Silence. Even the wind seemed to stop. The cowgirl lowered her rifle slowly, breath shaking. Around her, people began to emerge again, cautious, stunned. She turned to the chief, dropping to her knees beside him. Blood spread across his chest, dark against the pale of his skin. His eyes fluttered open. You kept your word, he murmured. She held his hand tight. Don't you dare speak like it's over. He gave a small smile. It was never about ending, it was about remembering. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Then remember with me. Stay. His fingers tightened weakly around hers. You ride east. Take the story to where the sun is born. Let them know we lived. I won't leave you, she said. You already carry me, he whispered. In every breath you take past this moment. She pressed her forehead against his, the heat of his skin fading by the second. I'll carry you to the horizon if I have to. He exhaled once, a long, soft sound, like wind through dry grass. Then, nothing. The world went still again. The crowd slowly gathered, silent now not from fear but from something heavier. A few men bowed their heads. The printer came forward, hat in hand. He gave us back our voice, he said quietly. The cowgirl wiped her face, stood, and lifted the chief's cloak from the ground. She draped it over his body and whispered something in Apache, words she didn't know the meaning of, only the feeling. When she looked up again, the sky was deep gold. The wind rose, scattering dust around her boots, lifting the edges of the cloak like the land itself was breathing him away. She turned toward the east. The papers in the press fluttered again, whispering the truth the way wind whispers through canyon walls. Without looking back, she mounted her horse. The crowd parted as she rode through, silent, reverent. The headline in one boy's hand fluttered in the breeze, "The land remembers." And as the sun fell behind her, the desert stretched ahead, endless and waiting. The road east was long and empty, a ribbon of pale dust stretching toward the horizon. The cowgirl rode at a slow pace, the wind tugging gently at her hat brim, the sky a vast silent ocean of gold and grey. The air smelled of sage and rain that would never fall. Behind her, the town had faded into nothing but a smudge of memory. Rooftops, voices, gunfire, smoke, all of it swallowed by distance. What remained was the echo of the chief's last words, carved into the silence. You already carry me. She didn't speak for miles, didn't need to. The rhythm of the horse's hooves was enough, steady, certain, like the beat of a heart she was borrowing for the road. By dusk, she reached a ridge overlooking a dry riverbed. The wind blew soft across the stones, carrying with it the faint cry of a hawk. She dismounted, legs trembling from exhaustion, and walked to the edge. The world stretched out before her, wide, raw, unforgiving, and somehow beautiful again. From her saddlebag, she pulled the last copy of the printed paper. The ink had smudged from her fingers, but the headline still stood clear, "The Land Remembers." She knelt and pressed the paper into the sand, letting the wind catch its edges. The page rippled, then lifted, carried east until it vanished against the sky. Her throat tightened. You were right, she whispered. The wind carries stories. The sun was sinking fast, bleeding color across the plains. She watched until the last light brushed the edge of the earth, turning the sand the same deep red as the firelight from that first night. The night she'd asked a stranger for help and found something larger than survival. She unpacked a small bundle wrapped in the chief's old cloak. Inside lay the arrow he had carved by the river, the one she'd carried since the night of the storm. The feathers were still perfect, untouched by time or dust. She dug a shallow hollow in the earth and placed it there, pressing the sand over it with care. You said the earth keeps what men forget, she murmured. Then let it keep you. The wind rose again, tugging at her hair, lifting the hem of her coat. She looked up, toward the mountains in the west, now purple in the dying light, and for a heartbeat, she thought she saw him standing there, not as a ghost, but as part of the world itself, tall, steady, silent as stone. The vision lingered just long enough for her to whisper, "Ride with me," before it faded into dusk. Night came gentle. Stars blinked awake one by one. The cowgirl built a small fire and sat beside it, hat resting on her knee. The flames licked upward, casting her shadow long and thin against the sand. From her coat pocket, she drew a small tin locket, tarnished, dented, barely holding together. Inside was a piece of paper folded tiny. Ink faded but still legible, a map drawn by her father years before. It marked the same land the Brants had stolen, the same land now freed by truth. She traced the lines with a fingertip. "Guess you can rest now too, Pa," she said softly. "The land's yours again." The fire cracked, sending a small burst of sparks into the dark. They drifted upward like tiny souls, finding their way home. When sleep finally came, it was deep and dreamless. At dawn, she woke to a pale blue sky and a horizon washed clean. The desert looked new again, as if the storm and the blood and the fire had all been the desert's own way of remembering. She saddled the horse, mounted, and turned toward the sunrise. In the far distance, a small caravan moved slowly east. Wagons, riders, a flag fluttering white in the light. Refugees, settlers, families chasing some promise beyond the edge of the map. She paused to watch them, then touched the brim of her hat and rode to join their trail. As she reached the ridgeline, the wind picked up once more, carrying dust, whispers, and the scent of distant rain. She looked back only once. The valley lay behind her, glowing faintly under the morning sun. Somewhere beneath that soil rested an arrow, and a story that would never die. The horse started forward again, hooves sinking softly into the sand. The wind followed. The land watched, and though no one spoke his name, every step she took whispered it, one syllable at a time, woven into the rhythm of a world learning to heal. By the time the ridge disappeared behind her, only the sound of the wind remained, steady, endless, alive. And for the first time, she didn't feel lost. She felt home. The wind remembers every story, and now, so do you. If this tale of courage and redemption struck a chord, don't let it fade into dust. Like, share, and subscribe to keep these forgotten frontiers alive, where every storm hides a secret and every silence holds a truth worth fighting for. Join us on the next ride across the untamed West, where mercy meets vengeance and the earth itself decides who earns redemption. Hit the bell to never miss another story born from dust and fire. Because out here, legends don't die, they ride on through those who remember.